Yo, what's going on? I hope you're doing well. Welcome. I had just received my SP404 MK2 probably a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I'm really getting well acquainted with the machine. I like it a lot, and today I want to talk about how I process drum breaks and add them to my beats on this device. I've gone through a couple processes in the past on the MPC-1, and because this machine is so much different than the MPC, I thought it'd be valuable to just go through the process on here, take advantage of some of the features that the MK2 has, such as the effects, the way you chop up beats, and things like that. So let's get right into this process. I'll start off by chopping up a melodic sample, get a beat going, and then we can add the drums on top of that. Today we're going to be using this record to develop the beat. It's Kamiko Kasai, We Can Fall in Love. I really love this record, both for the samples as well as just the amazing music on here. If you have a minute, make sure you check it out. It's definitely worth listening to. The song we're going to be sampling today is Love Don't Love Nobody. I love that. Check it out. I love this record. So let's get the sample onto the MK2. I'll chop that up and then we can start making a pattern. So I recorded the sample from the record onto the SP. Here's a little taste of what it sounds like. I'm going to do a basic chop with this, just sort of a kick snare type of thing, and then we can start building a pattern. Let's do it. So here we have our 13 chops. Like I said, it's a really basic chop, just something like this. Because of the speed of this sample, I think you can either speed it up or slow it down in order to have a good speed to make a pattern with. I think I'm going to slow it down. That way we'll just get a little bit more of a lo-fi feel. It'll lower the sample rate, and I really like doing that kind of stuff on the SP. So I'll press copy because I have them all in the same mute group, and that way I can change them all at once. I like that speed. I put it at -6 and I think that sounds great. So we have the sample ready to go. I can now record a pattern and then we can keep this beat moving. Let's do it. I love that chop. I think this beat's gonna be really sick. To me, this is the perfect type of sample and chop to put a drum break on. The drums aren't super prominent in the original sample, so it leaves a lot of room that you can really put something that knocks on top of it. There's the occasional snare, and you can hear those ride cymbals. So those are things that'll still add to the texture of the beat with the drum break on top, but it's not a ton of percussion that's already going on, so it's the perfect opportunity to add a break. So now that we have that sample chop figured out, let's start working on the drum break. I found a really sick break on a record I was listening to recently, so I'm gonna grab that, show you what it is. We can put it on the SP and chop it up. So the drum break is on this record by Lamont Dozier, Out Here on My Own. I'm sure this drum break's been used before. I just stumbled upon it when I was listening to this record. Lamont Dozier, most known for working with Motown on writing. Holland Dozier Holland did a lot of the writing credits on Motown, and this is Lamont Dozier of Holland Dozier Holland. I mentioned in this video right here, when I record drum breaks into my sampler, I usually slow down the record player. That way it just really slows down the beat, and if we want to turn it up, we'll still have a bit of a better recording. But here's what the drum break sounds like. So I'll record that onto the SP404. We can chop it up and then start arranging it into our own break. Let's do it. So I've got the drum break recorded right here on pad 9. I'm going to click the pad, and then I'm going to go to chop, so we can now chop up the drums and have a few different sections that we can then rearrange. Similar to how I chopped up the melodic sample, I want to do it on a quarter note basis, so it would be every single kick and snare. in this case because there is a kick and snare on the 1, 2, 3, and 4 beats. So let's do that, and then we can then rearrange the drums and come up with our own pattern to kind of make it our own drum break. So the first thing I'm going to do is just do a really rough chop with the pads as it plays, and then we can zoom in and make sure those chops are exactly where we want them. Let's do it. And I actually lied there. Each of the third beats don't have a kick. It's a hi-hat, but we still have something to identify that exact note. As you can hear with this pad, it starts with a hi-hat, not a kick. So now with this enter knob, we can zoom in and make sure we are exactly on each of the hits. So the first beat we don't have to worry about because I already chopped that out. Here's the second beat with the snare. We'll zoom in and that looks like it's right on, so that's perfect. Here we want to be on the hi-hat. There's a little bit of space in front of that, so I'm going to move that up a little bit. And same here. And as you can see, I'm just trying to get the marker of the chop right in front of the threshold for the drum hit that starts the beat. So I'll go through and do the rest, and then we can start rearranging our drums. Let's do it. Okay, I chopped up evenly that drum break, and they now are on these 16 pads in bank B. The one thing we want to make sure we do is put them all in the same mute group. That way we don't have two samples playing at the same time. So I'm just going to press Shift and 8, and then I'll find a blank mute group. Here's one here, and just put all those samples in the group. And that's going to be useful for a few reasons. The first, like I said, each sample is going to cut itself off. It's not playing over top of each other. And the other thing is when we go to change the speed, we can do all of the chops at the same time. We don't have to go through each one individually. And that brings us to the next step in this process, which is matching the speed of the drums to the speed of our sample chop. So the way that I do that is I go to the pattern select and play the chop that we did with the Kamiko Kasai record, which is at 84 BPM. And then we can now go in, play around with our drums, and see where we need to speed up and slow it down. It actually sounds really close to being on time right now, but I think we just need to slow it down slightly to make sure that there's no gaps in between the samples. You want to make sure there's no gaps in between the samples because right now it might not be obvious. I'm just playing through the speakers behind me, but if I had my headphones on, I would really hear that choppiness with the space in between each sample where the drums just become silent. So I'm going to go back to our drum page, go to the pitch and speed, and then when I hold copy, it changes the entire mute group. So I'll just slow that down by 1. We'll do -1, see how that sounds. I think I can turn it up a little bit. And the nice thing about changing the speed of drums is it doesn't have to be on key because there really is no key with the percussion. So let's move the speed knob and put that to 0.64, -0.64. I think that will sound good, but let's play the sample chop again and make sure it's on time. Okay, I think that sounds good. And now that we have our speed matched up to the sample, we can come up with a pattern that we want to use for our drums. We could just use the original pattern that the drum break is, which is this. But because we chop them on every quarter note, we can also rearrange it to be a bit different, maybe something like this. And you can kind of play around like that, come up with a different pattern, and then you have your own drums. It's not just pulling right from the break. The other thing to consider when you're coming up with your break, with this drum break, every single line has the exact same pattern. You'll notice that because if I press any of the pads in a certain row, they all have the same drum pattern. For example, I'll go through this fourth column right here. They all have the snare hit and then the open hi-hat. Let's check the second column right here. So all the drum sounds are the same there in terms of the pattern. However, I would try to incorporate all of the different columns because even though they have the same drum pattern, the timing is probably a little bit different and the sounds are just a little bit different as well because these were recorded on live drums. So in order to have those small little variations in your drum pattern, I would still try to incorporate all of the pads if possible. So let's record a drum pattern and see how it sounds with our sample. Let's do it. I think that drum pattern and the drum break matches the sample pretty well. One thing I mentioned at the beginning of the video is we want to make sure we take advantage of the features that the SP provides, and as I mentioned, one of those things is definitely the effects. So one thing I want to do is just add effects to the drums themselves, and this is the way that I usually like to do that. So I'm going to copy that pattern that we just did with the sample and the drum break. I'm going to copy that onto pad 5. And what I'm going to do is go into that pattern and completely delete all of the sample chops, the melodic sample chops, leaving just the drum break. So what we want to do that is play the pattern, go into record, go onto the page where the sample chops were, and then I want to press delete and delete all of those chops. And now what we're left with is a pattern with just the drum break. So now to add effects onto the drum break, because the new pattern is just the drums, we can play the pattern, go into our multi-effects, and then see what we want to add. One thing that I really like to add, and I actually have mentioned previously, is adding the compressor just to the drums. It's really easy to get carried away with this, but we'll try to keep it somewhat subtle, but still have it knock pretty hard here. So I'm going to play pattern 5 with the drum break, go to the multi-effects, and then let's go to the compressor. As you can hear, like I said, it gets pretty crazy. So let's turn the ratio down to maybe 15. Turn the level up a little bit. I'll turn the attack down, let's say 20. And I'll turn the sustain down to 35. I really like the way that's sounding, and just to compare that to what it was before, here it is without the compressor. Now let's add it back in. I just love the compressor on this thing, even though it does get a little bit crazy and it really kind of almost destroys your sound a little bit. That's exactly the reason I really like it. So in order to add this to our track permanently, what I'm going to do is resample pattern 5 onto a new individual sample pad, and then we can just add that new pad as the drum break into the pattern rather than having each individual drum break chop as part of this pattern 2, which we did first. So I'm going to resample. I'll find an empty pad somewhere. Here's one here. I'll do it on page D on pad 16. And then I want to click the pattern with the drum break on it. And I still have the multi-effects turned on. I usually like to play it through a couple times because the compressor can be a little bit temperamental. That way we can find exactly what part we want to resample. Okay. So now on this pad 16 on page D, we have those compressed drums as an individual sample. So I'm going to go on to start and end of that sample, normalize it. That way we're making sure that we still get that full volume. Now we can just trim it to make it just the 4 bars that we want. That way it'll be easy to add back into our pattern. And just to compare that to what we had before the compressor, here's what it sounded like. And here's the new one. Just way more crunchy, a lot more of a lo-fi sound because it's pulling up a lot of those spaces in between the drum hits. So those light hi-hats were getting a lot louder because those are being pulled up by the compressor. Another thing I really like doing, if you're not loving the tone of the actual drums that are in the break, is you can layer some of the drums with your own samples. So for example, right now I think that the snare in this break is a little bit muddy and it's just not giving me everything I want. So I'm going to layer my own snare drum sample onto the pattern that we already have. That way I can just give a little bit more even controls on the drum break. So let's add that. I would try to make sure that the drums that you're layering aren't too loud, otherwise it can really start to build up. So I'm going to turn that snare down just a little bit, and that way it'll still sort of blend in with the original break. Okay, I really like where this beat's going so far. What I'm going to do now is copy the pattern that we just completed and take out the melodic sample. That way we'll just be left with the drums again, but our updated compressed drums with the layering of the snare. And then I can add a different melodic sample chop. That way we'll have a new pattern to go off of and have a sort of second part to this beat. Let's do it. I'm happy this beat's going so far, and I think now we can just add some bass into this just to widen the frequencies a little bit, and then I think this beat's going to be in a pretty good spot. So let's add that bass line, see how it sounds. I think that wraps it up for this beat. I hope this showed how you can chop up your drum breaks, match the speeds, add effects on the SP404. If you like the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you want to see in a future video. Appreciate you so much as always. Thank you for stopping by and making music. Love you so much. Peace. you.